You're driving down Highway 50 in Nevada at 3 a.m. when your radio suddenly cuts to static. Then you hear it. A voice speaking coordinates. Coordinates that lead to a place that officially doesn't exist. Welcome to the most classified road in America, where missing time isn't a conspiracy theory, it's standard procedure. My name is Marcus, and for 3 years I worked as a transport driver for what my paycheck called Desert Logistics Solutions. But that was just a cover. What I really did was drive supplies to facilities that aren't on any map, to people who technically don't exist, carrying cargo that would make you question everything you think you know about our government. Before we dive deep into this rabbit hole, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see every desert highway in this country. And trust me, you'll want to remember this channel when you start noticing the signs yourself. The job posting appeared on a private contractor board that you need special clearance just to access. Transport driver needed, excellent pay, discretion required, background check mandatory. The pay was 3 times what any normal trucking job offered. The catch? I couldn't tell anyone where I worked, not even my wife. As far as she knew, I delivered medical supplies to rural hospitals. My first day started at a nondescript warehouse outside Reno. No signs, no company logo, just a concrete building surrounded by a 12-foot fence. When I arrived, a woman in a plain gray suit handed me a tablet and said 4 words that would define the next 3 years of my life. Read this. Sign everything. The contract was 47 pages long. Most of it was standard non-disclosure stuff, but buried on page 31 was a clause that made my blood run cold. Employee acknowledges that certain routes may result in temporal displacement, not exceeding 48 hours. Company is not liable for any psychological effects resulting from chronological inconsistencies. Temporal displacement. They were telling me, in legal jargon, that time might not work normally on this job. I should have walked away. Instead, I signed every page. The training lasted 1 week. They taught me to use encrypted GPS units that could receive coordinates from satellites that don't officially exist. They showed me how to identify unmarked military vehicles and what to do if I encountered them. They gave me a special radio that could communicate on frequencies reserved for black projects. But the most important part of training was the 3 rules I had to memorize. Rule 1, never deviate from the programmed route, even if it seems to lead nowhere. Rule 2, if you encounter any aircraft, immediately pull over and wait for them to pass. Rule 3, if your delivery window shows negative time, proceed anyway, and do not adjust your clocks. That 3rd rule didn't make sense until my first run. On a Tuesday in March, I got my first assignment. Destination, grid reference, XR471. The coordinates led to a spot in the Nevada desert, about 200 miles northeast of Las Vegas. According to my GPS, it was an empty desert. According to my encrypted GPS, it was my delivery point. The cargo was different from anything I'd ever transported. 12 identical silver cases, each about the size of a briefcase, weighing exactly 47 pounds. They had no labels, no serial numbers, just a small LED that pulsed green every 30 seconds. When I asked what was inside, my supervisor said, 47 pounds of need to know, and you don't need to know. I loaded up my truck, a modified semi with extra fuel tanks and reinforced suspension, and headed into the desert. The first 100 miles were normal highway driving, but as I got deeper into Nevada, the roads got stranger. Exit signs started showing numbers that didn't match any highway system I knew. Route 375 became Route 400, then Route 425. Numbers that shouldn't exist. Gas stations appeared in my regular GPS, but weren't there when I drove by. My cell phone lost signal, even though the bars showed full strength. And then, around mile marker 180, something impossible happened. My delivery window, which had shown an arrival time of 14:30, suddenly changed to 13:45. I was somehow supposed to arrive 45 minutes before I was supposed to leave my current location. According to Rule 3, I kept driving. The landscape started changing in ways that didn't make geological sense. Rock formations that looked like they belonged in Utah appeared next to sand dunes that belonged in Death Valley. The sun was in the wrong position for the time of day. My truck's thermometer couldn't decide if it was 85 degrees or 105 degrees, fluctuating wildly every few minutes. Then I saw the road that wasn't on my map. About 3 miles past where any rational highway should have ended, I found myself on perfect asphalt, stretching into the distance. No construction signs, no explanation of how a road this new and well-maintained could exist in the middle of nowhere. My encrypted GPS showed I was still on course, but my regular GPS had given up entirely, showing only a gray screen. The road led to a checkpoint that looked like it had been transported from the future. Solar panels powered LED signs that displayed my truck's license plate and cargo manifest before I even stopped. A guard emerged from a building that seemed to be made entirely of black glass. He never spoke, just scanned a barcode on my windshield I didn't remember having, and waved me through. Beyond the checkpoint, the desert transformed into something that belonged in a science fiction movie. Buildings that looked like giant geometric shapes rose from the sand. Vehicle tracks crisscrossed the ground in patterns too complex to be random. And in the distance, I could see aircraft that didn't look like anything the Air Force admits to owning. My delivery point was Building C7, a structure that appeared to be a perfect cube, about 50 feet on each side. No windows, no visible doors, just smooth concrete and a loading dock that opened automatically as I approached. Inside, I found something that still gives me nightmares. The interior of the building was bigger than the exterior, not slightly bigger, like clever architecture might explain, significantly bigger. The loading dock led to a corridor that stretched for what looked like hundreds of yards, far longer than a 50-foot building should contain. Overhead, lights ran in perfect lines toward a vanishing point that shouldn't have been possible. A technician in a white coat met me at the dock. She looked normal enough, except for her eyes. They were the wrong color, not brown or blue or green, but a color I don't have words for, a color that shouldn't exist in human eyes. Cargo transfer, authorization code 77 Alpha, she said, handing me a tablet. The screen showed a manifest for my 12 cases, but also listed items I wasn't carrying. 36 cases of something called temporal stabilizers, 14 containers of reality anchors, equipment that I definitely didn't have in my truck. I think there's been a mistake, I told her. I only have 12 cases. She smiled, and her teeth were slightly too sharp. Check your cargo bay again. I walked back to my truck, knowing what I would find, but hoping I was wrong. The cargo bay that I had loaded myself 3 hours earlier now contained 43 cases, including items I had never seen before. My delivery manifest had updated itself to match. The unloading took 20 minutes. Each case was logged by a scanner that beeped in patterns that almost sounded like music. The technician handled everything with thick gloves, even though the cases showed no radiation warnings or hazard symbols. When I asked why the gloves were necessary, she said, "Some of these exist in more than 3 dimensions. Direct contact can be problematic." The return trip was somehow worse than the delivery. My truck's odometer ran backwards for 30 miles. The sun moved in the wrong direction across the sky. At one point, I passed myself driving in the opposite direction, and my radio picked up my own voice reporting my location to dispatch. When I finally reached the warehouse in Reno, my supervisor was waiting with a stopwatch and a clipboard. "How did the run go?" she asked. I told her everything: the impossible building, the wrong-colored eyes, the cargo that multiplied itself. She nodded and made notes as if I were reporting routine traffic conditions. "Any temporal displacement?" she asked. I checked my watch against the clock on the wall. According to my watch, I had been gone for 8 hours. According to the wall clock, I had been gone for 6 hours and 37 minutes. About 90 minutes, I told her. She made another note. "Within acceptable parameters. Same time next week." Over the next 3 years, I made that run 47 times. No 2 trips were identical, but they all followed the same impossible pattern. Desert highways that led nowhere. Checkpoints staffed by people who weren't quite human, buildings that defied physics, and cargo that couldn't exist in any rational universe. I delivered cases full of liquid that glowed without being radioactive. I transported equipment that cast shadows in the wrong directions. Once, I carried a container that hummed with voices, speaking languages that predated human civilization. The manifest called it prehistoric audio samples. But no explanation could account for the fact that the voices were having conversations about events that hadn't happened yet. The strangest delivery was in my 2nd year. The cargo was a single case, smaller than usual, but impossibly heavy. It took 4 people to load it into my truck, and the weight distribution made my vehicle handle like it was carrying a small building. The delivery point was different too. Not a building, but a perfect circle burned into the desert floor, 40 feet across and still smoldering, despite showing no signs of recent fire. At the circle's center stood a man in a military uniform I didn't recognize. The insignia looked almost like standard Air Force, but the symbols were wrong. Instead of stars and stripes, his patches showed geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Right on time," he said, checking a watch that displayed symbols instead of numbers. "How long since you left base?" 4 hours and 20 minutes, I replied. He frowned and consulted another device, something that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a Geiger counter. "That's not right. You left base 17 minutes ago." I started to argue, but then I looked at my own watch. He was right. According to every timepiece I carried, I had only been driving for 17 minutes, but I had clear memories of 4.5 hours on the road, including a lunch stop and 2 fuel breaks. "Time works differently out here," the officer explained, helping me unload the heavy case. "The desert plays tricks on causality. Don't worry about it. Your brain will adjust eventually, but my brain never did adjust. Each trip left me more confused about the nature of reality. I started keeping detailed logs, trying to make sense of the inconsistencies, but the patterns I discovered were more frightening than random chaos would have been. The delivery points were connected, not just geographically, but dimensionally. Equipment I delivered to one facility would sometimes appear at another location before I had completed the first delivery. Personnel I met at different sites would refer to conversations we had never had, or remember versions of events that contradicted my own memories. The worst part was the growing realization that I wasn't the only driver making these runs. I began encountering other transport vehicles on routes that supposedly only I was authorized to use. When I tried to make contact by radio, I would hear my own voice responding, but saying things I had never said. Sometimes I would pass trucks identical to my own, driven by people who looked exactly like me, but wore different expressions. My supervisor explained this as quantum redundancy in the logistics network, multiple versions of the same delivery, carried out simultaneously across parallel timelines to ensure mission success. She said it was the most natural thing in the world. In my 3rd year, the assignments became more frequent and more bizarre. I was delivering equipment that didn't exist when I loaded it, but became real during transport. I carried passengers who claimed to be me from different timelines. Once, I transported what the manifest called bottled darkness, containers full of absolute black that absorbed light without reflection. The passengers were the worst part. They looked human, mostly, but they knew things they shouldn't know. Details about my childhood, names of friends I hadn't spoken to in years, the exact wording of conversations I had never had with them. They would sit in my cab and tell me stories about my own life that I didn't remember, but somehow felt true. One passenger, who claimed to be a researcher from a facility I had never delivered to, told me about experiments in temporal archaeology. We're not just moving objects through space, she explained. We're moving them through time. Some of what you carry is equipment that hasn't been invented yet. Some of it is artifacts from civilizations that haven't existed yet. How is that possible? I asked. Time isn't linear out here. The desert exists in a state of temporal flux. Past, present, and future all occupy the same space. What you're doing is helping us harvest technology and information from multiple timelines. She showed me a device that looked like a crystalline smartphone. When I looked at the screen, I saw images of cities I had never visited, but somehow recognized. Skyscrapers that twisted through dimensions, vehicles that flew without wings, people who looked human but cast no shadows. This is Las Vegas in 2157, she said. We pulled this footage from a timeline where human civilization took a very different path. The technology in those cases you deliver, some of it comes from there. The implications made my head spin. If they were harvesting technology from future timelines, what were they doing with it? Who was funding these operations? And most importantly, what would happen to those future civilizations if their technology was removed from their timeline? I tried to quit. After that conversation, I went to my supervisor and told her I was done, that the job was affecting my mental health. She listened patiently, then handed me a tablet displaying my employment contract. Page 47, which I somehow hadn't seen before, contained a clause about temporal employment obligations. By accepting the job and being exposed to chronological anomalies, I had become what they called temporally entangled with the project. Leaving wasn't just difficult, it was potentially dangerous to the stability of multiple timelines. You see, Marcus, she explained, you don't just work here now. You work here across multiple timelines. There are versions of you that have been doing this job for 30 years, versions that never started. If you quit abruptly, it could create a temporal paradox that might unravel all the progress we've made. She showed me surveillance footage from different timelines. In one, I was older, grayer, still making deliveries, but driving equipment I didn't recognize. In another, I was younger, but wearing a uniform instead of civilian clothes, suggesting I had joined the military side of the operation. In a third, I wasn't there at all, and the timeline showed significant technological stagnation. Your choice, she continued, is not whether to quit. It's whether to continue voluntarily or be transferred to a timeline where you never had the choice. I kept working, but I started documenting everything, every delivery, every anomaly, every impossible conversation. I hid the records in multiple locations, insurance against the possibility that they might try to erase my memories or transfer me to a timeline where I had never discovered the truth. The documentation revealed patterns that were even more disturbing than individual anomalies. The project wasn't just harvesting technology from other timelines. It was actively manipulating them. Equipment I delivered was being used to alter the course of events in parallel realities, ensuring that certain technological developments occurred while preventing others. We were essentially strip mining the multiverse, taking the best innovations from countless timelines and concentrating them in our own reality. But the cost was the gradual collapse of those other timelines. Each successful extraction weakened the fabric of parallel realities. My 47th and final delivery was different from all the others. Instead of cargo, I was transporting a person, She looked like a normal woman in her 30s, dressed in business casual clothing, but she radiated an aura of wrongness that made my skin crawl. When she got into my truck, the temperature dropped 15 degrees, and all my electronic equipment began displaying error messages. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen," she introduced herself. "I'm the project director for what you've been calling Desert Logistics Solutions. I understand you have questions." During the 4-hour drive to her destination, she explained the true scope of the operation. The facilities I had been delivering to were not just research stations. They were anchor points, locations where our timeline interfaced with others. The equipment I carried was maintaining the stability of these interfaces, while allowing selective extraction of resources and information. Letterum. "Think of it as controlled mining," she said. "Instead of extracting oil or gold from the ground, we're extracting technological and scientific advances from parallel realities. It's the greatest leap forward in human development since the agricultural revolution." But there was a darker side to the operation. The extraction process was destructive to the source timelines. Each successful harvest caused reality fluctuations that gradually degraded the stability of parallel worlds. Civilizations that might have thrived for millennia were slowly fading as their innovations were siphoned away. "How many timelines have you destroyed?" I asked. "Destroyed is a strong word," she replied. "We prefer optimized for resource extraction, and the number is classified, but it's significant enough to power human advancement for the next several centuries." She told me that I was being promoted. Instead of just making deliveries, I would be training new drivers and helping to expand the operation to other desert regions around the world. The Sahara, the Gobi, the Atacama, all were being prepared as sites for new extraction facilities. "You've proven reliable across multiple timelines," she explained. "We need people like you to help us scale up the operation." That night, I made my decision. I couldn't be part of genocide on a multiversal scale, even if the victims were versions of humanity I would never meet. I gathered all my documentation, uploaded it to secure servers in multiple countries, and prepared to run. But when I tried to leave my hotel room, I found the door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed. My phone had no signal. Dr. Chen was sitting in the chair by the window when I turned around, even though I had locked the door behind me, and she definitely hadn't been there moments before. "Going somewhere, Marcus?" she asked, her voice carrying an echo that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. I backed against the sealed door, my heart hammering. "How did you get in here?" "The same way you've been getting to places that don't exist for 3 years," she replied. "Space is negotiable when you understand how to manipulate it. Time is even more flexible." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down. We need to discuss your future. All of your futures." I remained standing, but I couldn't stop myself from listening. The room itself seemed to be compelling my attention, as if the walls were broadcasting her words directly into my brain. "You think you're the first driver to have an ethical crisis about our work," she continued. "We've been doing this for 47 years, across multiple timelines. We've seen every possible reaction to the truth. Some drivers embrace it, others try to fight it. A few attempt to run, like you're doing now." She pulled out a tablet and swiped through what looked like surveillance footage. "Here's you in timeline C7, where you tried to expose everything to the media. The story was discredited within hours, and you were institutionalized for psychiatric evaluation. Here's timeline F12, where you attempted to sabotage a delivery. You were arrested for terrorism and spent the rest of your life in federal prison." The footage showed versions of myself I didn't recognize, but the faces were undeniably mine. Different clothes, different expressions, but the same fundamental features. In one clip, I was being dragged away in handcuffs, screaming about temporal manipulation and parallel dimensions. In another, I sat in a padded cell, rocking back and forth while muttering coordinates. And here, she said, showing me a final clip, is timeline A1, where you accepted the promotion and became one of our most successful operations directors. You helped us expand the program to 17 different desert regions and established extraction points in over 300 parallel realities. The version of myself in this footage looked older, more confident, wearing an expensive suit and standing in what appeared to be a command center filled with screens showing data from multiple timelines. He was briefing a group of military officials about something called Project Temporal Harvest, explaining how they had successfully prevented a catastrophic war by selectively removing certain technologies from aggressive timelines. The choice isn't whether to cooperate, Dr. Chen explained. The choice is which version of cooperation you prefer, the willing participant or the broken prisoner. I found my voice. What about the timeline where I successfully stop you? Where I expose everything and shut down the operation? She smiled, and for a moment her face flickered, showing different features underneath. That timeline doesn't exist. We've made sure of that. Every possibility where our work is significantly disrupted has been adjusted. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just harvesting technology from other timelines. They were actively pruning the multiverse, eliminating any reality where their operations faced serious opposition. How is that possible? I whispered. Temporal causality is more malleable than most people realize, she said. When you have the right tools and sufficient understanding of quantum mechanics, you can influence the probability of certain outcomes across multiple realities. We've simply ensured that the timelines where we fail have a very low probability of existing. She stood and walked to the sealed window, pressing her hand against the glass. Where she touched, the surface became transparent, revealing not the hotel parking lot I expected, but a vast complex of buildings stretching to the horizon. Structures that defied architectural logic, connected by bridges that curved through dimensions I couldn't perceive. Welcome to the real facility, she said. What you've been delivering to were just collection points. This is where we process everything. The hotel room dissolved around us, and suddenly we were standing on a platform overlooking the impossible complex. The sky above showed multiple suns in different positions, and the air shimmered with energy. That made my teeth ache. Project Temporal Harvest has been active since 1976, Dr. Chen explained as we walked along a corridor lined with screens showing data from countless timelines. It began as a small military research program, investigating reports of UFO activity in the Nevada desert. What they discovered was that certain locations on Earth exist in a state of dimensional flux, where the barriers between parallel realities are naturally thin. She led me to an observation deck overlooking what she called the processing center. Below us, technicians worked with equipment that seemed to shift and change as I watched. Devices that looked like crystalline trees were sorting through objects that phased in and out of visibility. Containers full of liquid light were being analyzed by machines that appeared to be made of solid mathematics. The first breakthrough came in 1982, she continued. Dr. Margaret Thorne, the project's original director, discovered that the dimensional barriers could be artificially weakened using specific electromagnetic frequencies. This allowed for limited extraction of small objects from parallel realities. I watched as a technician opened a container that released a small cloud of what looked like silver dust. The dust immediately began forming complex geometric patterns in the air, creating structures that resembled circuit boards, but were clearly made of something more sophisticated than metal and silicon. That's computational matter from timeline X23, Dr. Chen noted. In that reality, humans discovered how to program raw materials at the subatomic level. One handful of that dust has more processing power than all the computers on Earth combined. The scale of the operation was staggering. Hundreds of technicians worked in the facility, processing artifacts and information from realities I couldn't even imagine. I saw weapons that fired beams of crystallized time, medical devices that could repair genetic damage by accessing healthy versions from alternate timelines, and communication equipment that allowed real-time conversation with versions of people who existed in different realities. By 1995, we had established permanent extraction points in 17 different timelines, Dr. Chen explained as we continued our tour. We began recruiting drivers like you to handle the increasingly complex logistics of moving materials between realities. Your job was just a small part of a much larger operation. She showed me a massive warehouse where extracted items were cataloged and studied. Shelves, stretching impossibly high, held artifacts that defied easy categorization. I saw books written in languages that wouldn't be invented for centuries, artwork created by non-human intelligences, and devices whose purposes were so advanced that human scientists were still trying to understand them decades after extraction. The real breakthrough came in 2003, she said, stopping at a display case containing what looked like a simple metal cube. We extracted this from timeline Q17. It's a reality anchor, a device that allows us to stabilize our own timeline while making controlled alterations to others. The cube was humming with energy that seemed to bend space around it. Other objects in the display case appeared distorted when viewed through the field it generated. With reality anchors, we could begin actively shaping other timelines instead of just harvesting from them, Dr. Chen explained. We could introduce or remove key individuals, alter the outcomes of important events, and guide the development of entire civilizations to maximize their utility as resource sources. I stared at the cube, horrified by the implications. You're not just stealing technology, you're playing God with entire universes. We're optimizing human potential across the multiverse, she corrected. In timeline B12, we prevented a nuclear war by removing the scientists who would have developed the most dangerous weapons. In timeline F8, we accelerated the development of clean energy by introducing key mathematical insights 50 years early. In timeline M3, we eliminated a plague that would have wiped out 90% of humanity. She led me to another section of the facility, where massive screens showed real-time data from hundreds of different timelines. Each screen displayed a different version of Earth, some showing technological paradises, others depicting post-apocalyptic wastelands, and many showing realities so alien that I couldn't parse what I was seeing. Every timeline serves a purpose in our grand design, she explained. Some are sources of advanced technology, others provide raw materials or scientific data. A few serve as testing grounds where we can experiment with societal changes before implementing them in our own reality. One screen caught my attention. It showed a version of Earth where the continents were arranged differently, and strange crystalline cities rose from landscapes I didn't recognize. The beings moving through those cities looked humanoid but were clearly not the same species as us. Timeline Z14, Dr. Chen noted. Humanity evolved differently there, developing along a more crystalline biological structure. Their technology is based on growing rather than building, very useful for certain applications. Another screen showed a reality where Earth appeared to be covered in a single massive forest, with tree cities that stretched into space. The inhabitants looked like a fusion of human and plant characteristics, with green skin and leaves instead of hair. Timeline P7. They solved the energy crisis by developing symbiotic relationships with photosynthetic organisms. We've extracted several of their biotechnology innovations. The tour continued for what felt like hours, though the clocks in the facility seemed to display different times depending on which timeline they were monitoring. I saw laboratories where scientists worked with materials that couldn't exist in normal physics, workshops where artisans crafted objects that changed function based on the observer's intent, and communication centers where operators maintained contact with versions of themselves across multiple realities. "The question now," Dr. Chen said, as we reached what appeared to be her office, a space that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, "is where you fit into our expanded operations." She gestured to a chair that materialized from nowhere, and I found myself sitting before I consciously decided to move. The office walls were covered with charts and diagrams showing the relationships between different timelines, with our reality at the center of an incredibly complex web of interconnections. "We're entering Phase 3 of temporal harvest," she explained, pulling up holographic displays that showed projected expansion plans. "Phase 1 was discovery and initial extraction. Phase 2 was systematic harvesting and reality manipulation. Phase 3 is total integration." The displays showed a future where the boundaries between timelines became completely permeable, allowing instant access to resources and personnel from any reality. Instead of sending drivers like me to make deliveries, they would simply open doorways between worlds, creating a unified multiverse under centralized control. "Your experience with temporal displacement and reality fluctuations makes you an ideal candidate for the integration team," she said. "You would help establish permanent portal networks between key timelines, overseeing the logistical challenges of managing resources across multiple realities." I tried to stand, to protest, to refuse, but the chair seemed to be holding me in place. "What happens to all those other timelines when you integrate them? Do the people get a choice in this?" "Choice is an illusion," she replied. "Every decision creates a new timeline, and every timeline we don't control represents a potential threat to our operations. Integration eliminates that uncertainty by ensuring all possibilities serve our purposes." She showed me projections of what integration would look like. Instead of separate timelines, there would be a single, managed reality with access to resources and capabilities from all possible worlds. Scarcity would be eliminated. Technological advancement would accelerate exponentially, and humanity would achieve a form of godhood over the multiverse. "But it wouldn't be humanity," I said. "It would be you. A single organization controlling infinite realities. Someone has to be in control," she said simply. "Left to their own devices, most timelines develop in chaotic, inefficient ways. Wars, environmental disasters, social collapse. We've seen it countless times. Our guidance ensures optimal outcomes." The office began to shift around us, and I realized we were moving through the facility toward a different section. The walls became transparent, showing me glimpses of operations I hadn't seen during the tour. In one area, technicians were working with what looked like captured beings from other realities, studying their biology and technology. In another, I saw what appeared to be a prison block housing individuals who looked human, but wore uniforms I didn't recognize. "Those are timeline dissidents," Dr. Chen explained when she noticed my stare. "Individuals from other realities who discovered our operations and attempted to interfere. We can't eliminate them without risking paradoxes, so we contain them here." One of the prisoners looked exactly like me, but older and wearing what appeared to be a military uniform. Our eyes met through the transparent wall, and he mouthed the single word, "Run." "That's you from Timeline K4, Dr. Chen said casually. "In that reality, you joined the military and eventually discovered our operations through official channels. He's been quite persistent in his attempts to expose us, even after extraction to our facility. The implications were staggering. They weren't just manipulating timelines. They were kidnapping people from realities where the operations faced opposition, removing potential threats by literally pulling them out of their own worlds. "How many people are you holding here?" I asked. "Currently, about 12,000 individuals from various timelines," she replied. "Scientists who might develop countermeasures, politicians who might expose us, even ordinary citizens who witnessed too much. Think of it as a multiversal witness protection program." We arrived at what she called the Integration Planning Center, a vast space filled with holographic models of timeline networks. Technicians worked at stations that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions, manipulating probability matrices and causal relationships across thousands of realities. "This is where we design the future," Dr. Chen said. "Every major event in human history across all timelines is planned and coordinated from this room. Wars, scientific breakthroughs, natural disasters, social movements, we script them all to achieve optimal resource extraction and societal development." I watched in horror as technicians adjusted parameters that would affect billions of lives across multiple realities. One was increasing the probability of a technological breakthrough in timeline D7. Another was introducing a plague into timeline R3 to reduce population pressure. A third was eliminating a key historical figure from timeline M12 to prevent the development of antimatter weapons. "You're monsters," I whispered. "We're gardeners," she corrected. "The multiverse is a vast garden, and like any garden, it requires careful cultivation. Some plants must be pruned, others must be transplanted, and weeds must be eliminated. The end result is a more beautiful and productive landscape." She led me to a particular workstation where a technician was working on something labeled Project Localized Integration. The displays showed familiar locations, the Nevada desert routes I had traveled for 3 years. "Your old delivery routes are being converted into permanent portal networks," she explained. "Instead of sending drivers through dimensional fluctuations, we are creating stable doorways between realities. The process should be complete within 6 months." I realized what this meant. The temporal displacement I had experienced, the missing time and altered memories, were side effects of experimental portal technology. I had been a test subject, not just a driver. Every delivery had been an experiment in moving matter and personnel between realities. "The headaches you've been having," she continued, "are a result of temporal exposure. Your brain has been partially synchronized with multiple timelines. This makes you ideal for integration work. But it also means you can never return to a normal life in a single reality." The headaches had been getting worse over the past few months. Sometimes I would remember conversations that hadn't happened, or wake up with knowledge I hadn't possessed the night before. I had attributed it to stress from the job, but now I understood it was something far more serious. "Your neural pathways have been permanently altered," Dr. Chen explained. "You exist partially in multiple timelines simultaneously. In timeline A7, you're still making deliveries. In timeline C2, you died in a car accident 2 years ago. In timeline F9, you never took this job at all. But you're aware of all these possibilities because your consciousness has become distributed across the multiverse." The room began to spin. Or maybe I was spinning through dimensions. I caught glimpses of other versions of the facility, some larger, some smaller, some filled with different technologies entirely. In one version, the technicians weren't human at all, but some kind of crystalline beings that manipulated reality through pure thought. In another, the facility was underwater, operated by aquatic versions of humanity. "This is what integration means," Dr. Chen said, as reality stabilized around us. "Instead of existing in one timeline, you exist in all of them simultaneously. You have access to the knowledge and resources of infinite versions of yourself. Isn't that better than being trapped in a single, limited reality?" I tried to focus on her words, but my mind was reeling from the implications. If I existed in multiple timelines, what happened to the versions of me that didn't work for temporal harvest? Were they still living their lives, unaware of this larger reality? Or had they been somehow absorbed into my consciousness? The other versions of you still exist, she said, apparently reading my thoughts. But they're converging. As integration proceeds, the boundaries between timeline-specific versions of individuals become more permeable. Eventually, you'll have access to all their memories and experiences. She showed me to another viewing area, this one overlooking what she called the Convergence Laboratory. Below us, I could see individuals who appeared to be flickering between different versions of themselves. One moment, a person would look young and healthy. The next, they would appear older and scarred. Then they would shift to show entirely different clothing and expression. These are volunteers from the early integration experiments, she explained. They're learning to consciously access their alternate selves. With practice, they can draw upon skills and knowledge from any timeline where they exist. One of the subjects looked up at our viewing window, and I gasped. It was Dr. Chen herself, but younger, wearing a lab coat instead of a business suit. She waved at us, then suddenly shifted to show an older version with gray hair and burned scars across half her face. A third shift showed her in military uniform with colonel's insignia. I've been integrated for 15 years, the Dr. Chen beside me explained. It's quite liberating, actually. When you have access to the experiences and knowledge of dozens of versions of yourself, you never feel limited by a single life's constraints. The observation made my stomach turn. She was describing the systematic destruction of individual identity as if it were a gift. But before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and automated announcements echoed through the corridors. Temporal breach in Sector 7. All personnel to emergency stations. Timeline cascade detected. Dr. Chen's expression shifted from calm confidence to genuine concern. That's impossible, she muttered, checking a device that appeared to be made of crystallized time. The probability matrices showed no chance of cascade failure for another 6 months. Through the viewing window, I could see technicians scrambling to control equipment that was sparking and smoking. The holographic timeline displays were flickering erratically, showing realities blinking in and out of existence. What's happening? I demanded. Something is destabilizing the timeline network, she said, her voice tight with worry. If I didn't know better, I'd say someone was attacking us from outside the multiverse entirely. The facility shook, and cracks appeared in the walls. Not ordinary cracks, but rifts that showed glimpses of other realities bleeding through. I could see fragments of different worlds, a timeline where the facility was underwater, another where it was buried in ice, a third where it appeared to be floating in space. We need to get to the emergency control center, Dr. Chen said, grabbing my arm. As we ran through corridors that kept changing around us, she explained what was happening. Our operations depend on maintaining careful balance between timelines. Too much extraction from one reality, too many alterations to causal events, and the entire network becomes unstable. We passed laboratories where experiments were running out of control. In one room, I saw a device that was generating copies of itself, filling the space with identical machines that hummed in perfect harmony. In another, temporal anchors were spinning wildly, creating pockets of accelerated and slowed time throughout the room. The integration process requires precise calibration, she continued as we dodged falling debris that flickered between different states of matter. If too many timelines converge simultaneously, it creates a cascade effect. Reality itself begins to break down. We reached the emergency control center, a massive chamber filled with screens showing data from thousands of timelines. Most of the displays were showing error messages or had gone completely dark. The few that still functioned showed scenes of chaos, cities phasing in and out of existence, people aging decades and seconds before returning to their original ages, technology reversing its own development. The facility's director, a man I had never seen before, was shouting orders to technicians who were frantically trying to stabilize the cascade, shut down all non-essential extractions, activate the reality dampeners, and someone find out what triggered this. Dr. Chen pushed through the chaos to reach him. Director Morrison, what's the status? Catastrophic, he replied without looking away from the displays. We're losing 17 timelines per minute. At this rate, we'll have total network collapse within 3 hours. I watched in fascination and horror as entire realities winked out of existence on the screens. Each dark monitor represented billions of lives, entire civilizations that had just ceased to exist because of the facility's operations. Sir, one of the technicians called out, we're detecting anomalous signals from the quantum substrate. Something is actively accelerating the cascade. Director Morrison finally turned, and I saw that his face was flickering between different versions, just like the integration subjects. But his shifts were unstable, chaotic, showing versions of himself that looked increasingly desperate and afraid. Impossible, he said. Nothing can access the quantum substrate without our equipment. The technician pointed to a display showing what looked like waves of energy moving through the timeline network. Sir, these signals aren't coming from any of our monitored realities. They're originating from outside the multiverse entirely. The implications hit me like a physical blow, something beyond the multiverse, a force or intelligence that existed in a realm even higher than the infinite parallel realities, was attacking the facility. What exists outside the multiverse? I asked Dr. Chen. Her face had gone pale, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely frightened. Theoretically, the entities that created the multiverse in the first place, we always assumed they were long gone, or at least completely indifferent to what happened within their creation. Another massive tremor shook the facility, and several more timeline displays went dark. Through the cracks in the walls, I could see something that made my mind struggle to process what I was witnessing. It looked like massive shapes moving in a space that had no dimensions, beings of pure mathematical concept that existed beyond physical reality. They're here, Director Morrison whispered. The architects, they've come to shut us down. The screens began displaying messages in languages that predated human civilization, symbols that hurt to look at directly. A technician attempted to translate using the facility's xenolinguistic computers. It's a cease and desist order, she said, her voice filled with disbelief. They're telling us to stop our operations immediately and restore all altered timelines to their original states. That's impossible, Dr. Chen protested. We've made thousands of changes across hundreds of realities. The computational power required to reverse everything would require... She trailed off as the largest screen in the control center activated, showing what appeared to be a direct communication from the architects. The image was difficult to focus on. Shapes that existed in too many dimensions, colors that had no names, patterns that conveyed meaning through pure mathematical beauty. When the architects spoke, their words appeared directly in our minds rather than through our ears. Children of timeline. Prime, your manipulation of causal structures ends now. You have exceeded acceptable parameters of reality adjustment. Director Morrison stepped forward, his form stabilizing as he focused on addressing these cosmic entities. We've been improving the multiverse, eliminating inefficiencies, preventing disasters, optimizing development across all realities. You have been gardening a field that was never yours to tend, the architects replied. Each timeline was designed to explore different possibilities. Your interference has reduced infinite diversity to a single, sterile optimization. The communication continued, and I began to understand the true scope of what temporal harvest had been doing. The multiverse wasn't just a collection of parallel realities. It was a vast experiment in possibility, designed by beings beyond our comprehension to explore every potential path of existence. Every timeline serves a purpose in the greater design, the architects explained. Realities where humanity fails, realities where different species evolve, realities where physics works differently. All are necessary components of the complete picture. Your harvesting has been destroying crucial data, Dr. Chen tried to argue. But we've prevented suffering. Wars, plagues, disasters. We've eliminated them from dozens of timelines. Suffering teaches. Failure instructs. Disaster reveals resilience. You have been deleting the lessons from the multiverse's classroom. The facility shook again, more violently this time. Through the dimensional rifts, I could see the architects beginning to take direct action. Timelines that had been altered by temporal harvest were being restored to their original states. Technologies that had been extracted were being returned to their source realities. People who had been kidnapped across dimensions were disappearing from the facility's prison blocks. You will cease all operations, the architects commanded. You will destroy your extraction equipment. You will release all captured individuals to their proper timelines, and you will accept isolation to your original reality. Director Morrison's form began flickering more rapidly, cycling through versions of himself that showed increasing desperation. You can't do this. We've advanced human civilization by millennia. We've solved problems that would have taken centuries to overcome. You have advanced one version of humanity at the expense of infinite others, the architects replied. This is not progress. This is parasitism. The screens around us began showing the systematic dismantling of temporal harvest's operations. Portal networks were collapsing, extraction points were being sealed, and the carefully maintained timeline modifications were unwinding like a film being run in reverse. I watched as wars that had been prevented began to occur, as plagues that had been eliminated returned to their original timelines, as technological developments that had been accelerated slowed back to their natural pace. It looked like catastrophe, but the architect's meaning was becoming clear. Every struggle, every failure, every disaster was part of a larger pattern of learning and growth. What happens to us? Dr. Chen asked, her voice barely a whisper. Those who participated willingly in the harvesting will be isolated to Timeline Prime, the architects responded. You will live out your natural lives in the reality you sought to optimize, cut off from all others. Those who were coerced or deceived will be given the choice of remaining or returning to their original timelines. I realized they were talking about me. After 3 years of unknowing participation in multiversal genocide, I was being offered a way out. The driver from Timeline Prime may choose, the architect said, addressing me directly. Return to your original life with memories intact, or remain to help repair the damage that has been done. The facility was disintegrating around us, reality fracturing as the architects systematically undid years of timeline manipulation. Director Morrison and Dr. Chen were flickering more rapidly now, their integrated forms becoming unstable as they were forcibly returned to single timeline existence. Choose quickly, the architects urged. The window for safe extraction is closing. I looked around at the chaos, at the people who had convinced me I was part of something revolutionary and beneficial. The truth was that we had been cosmic vandals, spray painting graffiti on the walls of infinity, without understanding the masterpiece we were defacing. I'll stay, I said. I'll help fix what we broke. The architect's response came as a wave of approval that felt like warm sunlight in my mind. Then you will remember everything, and you will help guide the restoration. The facility exploded around us, but instead of destruction, it felt like liberation. I was swept up in a tide of multiversal energy, carried through dimensions I couldn't name, toward realities I had never imagined. When the chaos settled, I found myself standing in what looked like a vast library, but instead of books, the shelves held crystallized experiences from across the multiverse. Each crystal contained the complete history of a timeline, the lives and dreams and struggles of entire civilizations. "This is the archive," a voice said behind me. I turned to see one of the architects, though looking directly at them was like trying to stare at the concept of mathematics itself. "Here we store the true records of all realities, uncorrupted by interference. My job," they explained, "would be to help catalog and restore the timelines that had been damaged by temporal harvest. It would take millennia. But time worked differently in the archive. I would age slowly, live long enough to see the multiverse restored to its original diversity and beauty. And so I work here now, in a library that exists between all realities, helping to repair the damage caused by the greatest crime in multiversal history. Every day I catalog new worlds, restore lost possibilities, and occasionally I'm allowed to visit the timelines we've repaired to see how they're developing without interference. The Nevada desert routes I once traveled are still there, but they're just roads now, leading to normal places where normal people live normal lives. The facilities have been dismantled, the portals sealed, the impossible technologies scattered back to their rightful realities. Sometimes I wonder about Dr. Chen and Director Morrison and the others, trapped forever in a single timeline after experiencing the infinite. But then I remember the billions of lives they destroyed with their optimization, and I return to my work with renewed purpose. The multiverse is vast and strange and beautiful, precisely because it contains every possibility, even the dark ones, even the failures, even the endings like this one, where cosmic justice comes too late to undo all the damage, but just in time to prevent worse. If you're listening to this story, or remember, the next time someone promises to optimize your reality, to eliminate suffering and inefficiency from your world, ask them what they plan to do with all the beautiful, messy, necessary chaos they're taking away. Because in the end, it's not perfection that makes existence meaningful. It's the infinite possibility that anything, even perfection, might be waiting just one timeline away. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories from the spaces between realities. And let me know in the comments, if you could visit any parallel version of your life, which one would you choose? Just remember, sometimes the grass is greener in other timelines for reasons you really don't want to know.